I think the one thing that founders tend to misjudge is how much control they have over anything in both directions. It's your company. You can just decide how things work and tell people what it is. And just if they don't like it, they can go to hell. If you don't already experience that, you're not our customer. It doesn't matter. Like, it just doesn't matter. It's not what you're going to build. It's not why it's important for your business. It's not how it's going to propel your application forward. It's not about the time you'll save. It's not about your developers. It's nothing. It's an API. It's a vector database. Here's the API. Here's how much it's going to cost you. Here's the performance. If you like it, great. If you don't like it, go to hell. All the metrics, all the adoption, everything just completely was like a discontinuity. It went from essentially nothing to like something that looks like adoption. And I remember towards the end of the journey, I was giving up. We had like 6 more months of runway, effectively failed to raise the seed round. We're like, okay, now what do you do? Like, do you just stop and try a Hail Mary again in 4 months when hopefully something changes? There was one more meeting. Screw this deck that we worked on that we tried and failed 40 times. I'm going to just rewrite the whole thing. And suddenly this clicked.
That's product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I called it the product market fit question.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I mean, the name of the show is Product Market Fit.
Do you think the product market fit show has product market fit? Because if you do, then there's something you just have to do. You have to take out your phone. You have to leave the show 5 stars. It lets us reach more founders and it lets us get better guests. Thank you.
Edo, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you, man.
Dude, so I mean, I just looking through, and we were chatting the other day, but I'm looking through your profile here. You're at Yahoo, and then you're at AWS, and you're like building SageMaker. It's like 2018, 2019. You're like the peak of AI in AWS. And you leave, man, to start a startup. Like, why would you do that, dude? What happened?
It's a great question. I think it comes down to the vision on the market and where things are going. And I'll start by saying that except for that, everything else was exactly the wrong time to start a company. I had a 4-year-old and 1-year-old twins. My wife was working full-time at a hospital. I had a pretty fun and exciting job at AWS. We were building a lot of amazing technologies. I had like 100 and some engineers and scientists
I'm
working.
sure you were being paid quite well as well.
Yeah, I don't even want to go into that. Obviously, there's something really nice about like a nice lump of cash landing in your bank account every month.
I say that, by the way, like, all joking aside, I just want to comment, like, it is a real thing in the sense that if you do the math when you're thinking of starting a startup and you start from a position like you were at, or at Google or Meta or one of these kind of like top tech companies, it's actually quite hard to make the leap if you focus a lot on it, just because, like, in order, and again, not getting into what you were specifically making, but just as a general point, like, in order for your startup, for you to make as much from your startup, given the 10 years it normally takes, given the success that they normally have, et cetera, like, it's got to be a very big outcome. Like, in other words, like, the math is almost like not really on your side, not maybe like the number one reason to start a startup.
No, 100%. Add to that the rationale for starting a company being bad. When I was 40. Again, I've already had like a pretty, I was an adjunct professor and a director and a this and that. Like, I was already in a place in life where going back to like walking the desert and working my ass off, not seeing my kids and making less than an intern at Facebook is not necessarily the wisest decision, right? And I'll give my wife all the credit for this, which I remember the kind of kitchen table discussion where I said, I really do want to go do this. She said, well, what's the worst that can happen? And I said, well, it's the worst that can happen is what happens with a lot of startup companies, which is I'm going to work my ass off for several years, make no money, and it will end with heartbreak. And then I'll have to go and find another job, and we will have consumed some, big fraction of, our savings. And she was very cavalier about it. She said, sure. Our kids go to school, they have clothes, we have a car. Just promise me we will be able to keep paying the mortgage. And so we took out the Excel spreadsheet. We looked at it. It's like, yep, yeah, we can do that. And said, go do it. That's your calling. That's what you want to do. That you believe in building your own company and doing something huge, and let's do it.
Kudos to her, but it is actually like, on a serious note, like very important to be aligned. Like, a lot of founders. I mean, some founders are like in their 20s and it's just like, boom, go for it. Why not? But then when you're like a bit older and you have a family and you have a wife, like, or a husband, and if you're not aligned, having that kind of short personal runway always eating at you is a recipe for disaster, because it always takes so much longer than you think to kind of get off the ground. And the last thing you want is to have to kind of forcibly fail because you just ran out of like personal time, or like just got misaligned as a family, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, I got to go back to work. I thought in 6 months we would do it, but you needed 2 years or so.
I agree. And also I think it has to do also with a personal lifestyle choice and what's important to you in life, to be honest. Until I was 30, I was a scientist. I was a PhD and then a postdoc. And then I started my first company. And like, until I was, all my friends around me and my age group were already like making big salaries and, sort of like living a very different life than I was living. And I had absolutely no problem with it because I did something that I felt passionate about and I felt really strongly about and enjoyed my day to day. And it's exactly the same decision with starting a company. That's what I will feel fulfilled doing. I believe in this mission. I believe in building something that I think would be long lasting and important to me. And sort of like the final financial outcome of this thing, it was always secondary is an overstatement. It was really not important. I'm very glad to say that we've done really well, and I think the eventual outcome hopefully would be great for me personally. But even now with the day to day, it's not. Even now to this day, we're 5 years in, Pinecone is a raving success and so on. I would have done much to this day. I mean, put my stock aside, I will have done a lot better had I stayed at AWS, right? And it's still fine. I'm still very happy with it. I think still it was an amazing decision for me. So 100%, when you're a startup founder, you really have to think about what's important to you, what you're willing to tolerate, what is a good outcome in your opinion. My suggestion is to not factor in financials into what a good outcome looks like.
So we jumped in because of me to kind of like almost like the middle of the story, but maybe you can take just a few minutes, give us like a little bit deeper, just, your background and how you'd gone to this place where you take this moment to kind of, take the leap of faith and start a startup, in the first place.
I'll start very early in my career. I started my degree in physics and I knew absolutely nothing about computers or computer science. And I just figured I'll be a very bad physicist if I don't know how to code, because obviously, right? And so I took a minor in computer science just because I felt like it's going to force me to become at least a decent engineer.
And where was this? Where were you going to school?
I was in Tel Aviv University. Midway, I fell in love, obviously, with algorithms, with math, and the computer science side of it. Ended up moving to do my PhD at Yale in computer science. Interestingly, I sort of bounced around a lot in computer science between different domains. So I've spent a bunch of time on data science, on functional analysis, on graph theory, on high performance computing, on so different domains of computer vision to some at some period. Only after like 2.5 years in my PhD, I really fell in love with what is now called AI, and then before that it was called ML. And
what year was this that you fell in love with it?
So this is 2000 and probably 3-4.
Okay, a while ago.
I remember I was doing computer vision on hyperspectral images. So these are images. Images are usually taken with 3 spectra. Red, RGB, red, green, blue. There are special microscopes that actually take 150 or something different spectra. That's incredibly important because different chemicals like have different protocol color. And so you can do things like, biopsies and all sorts of analysis on these images in a way that, of course, the human eye can't distinguish. Also, we only see 3 colors, but with computer vision, you can really, for example, segment an image way better if you can see 150 different colors rather than 3. But back then, our machines had like a 512 megabytes of memory, and like 3 images were like big data, you know? And so that kind of forced us, like this like first wave of AI machine learning people, to really think very, very, very deeply about the implementation of everything. Exactly how you make everything efficient, so you can actually do something with a very limited set of resources that you have. And that's where I found my passion on marrying the machine learning aspects of it and the sort of the optimization functions that you're trying to solve with the very limited resources at hand. So this is very, very deeply intellectual, and is, so the engineering of it and the math of it and the use case kind of intermingle in a very deep way. And I really fell in love again with the foundations of machine learning, all the optimization of later neural nets as well, and high dimensional geometry.
I was going to ask, like, was there like deep learning happening at that time with people talking? Because I know like high level, it was like not kind of highly thought of until they became very, very important. But I just don't remember the timeline of when that kind of happened.
Deep learning wasn't like a big thing. Again, deep learning is even now is antiquated. Like people don't even call it deep learning anymore. That's already, ancient history. But the same algorithms that train those networks were training even linear classifiers. We're training, other kinds of simple networks, shallow networks, and so on. The optimizations that we see today, a lot of them are rooted literally 20 years back. Specifically, the part that I felt super excited about was this like viewing data as this like distribution of these points in high dimensional space, which is how all machine learning models work. Okay, all the clustering, all the classification, everything works in kind of the data is this like data point, this like this like collection of high dimensional vectors. Yeah, I mean, I spent multiple years doing that. Then started my postdoc in applied math, created my first company, and then in 2016 I moved to AWS to basically start a new organization. I wasn't leading the organization. It was like 3 people at the time who said, okay, we're going to build AI services out of AWS.
And this is, by the way, like the idea of AWS at that point was people would build what, like computer vision on top, like predictive analytics on top, or something else? Like what was kind of the main products?
Correct. It was very, again, it was early days for machine learning, linear classification, recommendation systems, XGBoost and, model hosting and data prep and all that stuff that we've been doing for 20 years. Like the world was waking up to them, and we said, hey, AWS needs to have a set of services. Again, for me, that was extremely exciting for 2 ways. A, because it was a big play and we could actually go do something very meaningful. But also because the whole business model around cloud services is how efficiently you can do something, right? If you can achieve the same outcome with 1/10 of the hardware, then you can charge 1/10 of the price and still be profitable, right? And so efficiency and speed and accuracy and all that stuff became not only something that I enjoyed geeking about and building, it became the business offer. It became the offering in the cloud, right? And so for the next 4 years, roughly 3 years, I spent building SageMaker and a bunch of other services, ended up managing roughly 100 scientists and engineers working with every part of AWS and different storage, retrieval, search, recommendations, and so on. And throughout that time, vector search and what we now think about as what vector databases are was a fundamental piece of how almost every machine learning system was working, right? But we would keep building it into other products. Like if you're doing ad serving, you would have to have that capability inside your ad server. If you're doing your recommendation engines, that's how your recommender engine worked, but you didn't think about yourself as building a vector database. You thought about yourself as building a really high-performant recommender system. And then 2017, I think, late 17, BERT comes out, which is probably I think it's, I'm pretty sure this is considered the first true public actual LLM, the transformer models and so on. Very sort of quintessential technology product breakthrough. It's crude, it's hard to work with, it's kind of slow, it's unpredictable, it has many bad attributes. but it also does something qualitatively different and better. And you're like, wait a second, there is a breakthrough here. There is something that we can do that we couldn't do before. Sure, it's very crude, but now we've figured out we can do something we couldn't do before.
What was that something? Like, what was the kind of key, the simple demo of the power of BERT?
So people started building. Scraping the top layers and creating embeddings with BERT, and suddenly semantic search started being a lot more powerful. You started being able to deal with language in a way that was not super brittle, because again, before that, the keyword-based search engines and so on were, you spend God knows how many hours tokenizing things and stemming words and all sorts of the journey of making a keyword search-based solution for search, for example, work well, was months worth of data science and optimization, and you had to be pretty deep into it. And suddenly you could have not only all of that sort of delegated to a model, but the results were just significantly better. You could just see that this thing sort of like gets it in a way that none of the data pipelines that we've built before were able to do that, right? Again, it was far from being perfect. It was expensive and slow and clunky, but it did something qualitatively significantly better. And what happened in the market is suddenly embeddings and vectors and search and all that stuff started really popping up as something that engineers were talking about. It wasn't just, the scientists and the PhDs sort of geeking out about this thing and the engineers saying, I don't know, I have no idea what you're talking about, but I sure hope it works.
Like, maybe for all the non-technical founders, like what is a vector database? Like, when is it used? What's it for?
So the primary use case of that is really when you represent complex data, say an image or text or whatever, with a model. If you process it with an LLM, or if you process it with a computer vision or image, foundational model, what you get is what's called an embedding. It's a numerical representation of that object that is literally a list of floating point numbers, right? It's the output of the layer in the network, which is just a list of numbers. That list of numbers tends to be incredibly rich and incredibly insightful about the content of this image. So if you process an image with a neural net, you can ask yourself, is there a person in it? Not necessarily whatever. What is the color of that pixel? If it's language, what does it mean? What does it align? So for example, a very simple example that shows that there's something semantically deep is that we would take networks that do machine learning translation. So you start in a sentence in Arabic and you end in a sentence in French. In the middle of that network, there is a numeric representation that knows nothing about the original sentence, right? But somehow it can translate it into French. So clearly the meaning is hidden inside of that representation, right? Somehow, right? It might be opaque to you and me when we read this thing, but for models, it's everything. It has the actual meaning. It doesn't care about the tokens. Frankly, it doesn't even care about the language. That is a breakthrough. You can suddenly search across all languages. Now, what a vector database does is let you search with those representations, stores, organizes, and let you search and operate directly on those, millions or billions of numeric representation of objects. And suddenly you can access and transact against really complex pieces of information you just couldn't before, right? If it's multilingual search, if it's image search, if it's, representing, shopping preferences of somebody, whatever. And then now you can do a shopping recommendation. It opens the door to being able to access and deal with massive amounts of data that is unstructured or semi-structured or complex in a way that you wouldn't know how to code against it, but you can train a model to understand it. And then you can work with a vector database. The interesting thing is just, we talk about founder stories. I had, at that point when I started Pinecone, I had built the internal workings of vector databases, God knows how many times, 3, 4, 5, 6 times in different products. I had myself experimented a lot and built my own libraries and so on. The term vector database didn't exist. It just didn't exist. Nobody talked about it this way. I had just figured it, like this is a wide enough use case. It's hard enough. So few people know how to do it well, and it needs to be done really well, once and for all, so everybody can use the service. But again, I didn't know how to call it a vector. I talked about vector search and about retrieval and about this, semantic stuff and so on. But frankly, neither potential customers that I spoke with had any clue what the hell I was talking about, nor investors. And this was probably the hardest part. Like I really had incredible difficulty raising money for this thing because I had just come out of AWS. I was known as the SageMaker guy. Back in the day, if you rewind back, 6 years, ML Ops was the hottest shit in town. Everybody was hosting models and Kubernetes, automation and all that stuff. And everybody had assumed I was leaving AWS to build Pinecone, and the Pinecone would be an ML Ops system. So every investor in the Bay Area was very happy to meet with me.
I would think you're incredibly fundable. Like, your profile reads like a screaming, whatever this person's doing, write them a $5 million C check and just, wait and see.
Correct. But then I would explain what I want to do. And
then you would start talking.
I'm like, I have no idea what this shit is. It's got nothing to do with what I thought you were going to do. Frankly, I don't get it.
And how, I'm actually super curious, how did you at that point try to explain what you were doing, or why it mattered? How did you approach that?
I'm going to tell you what I did. I'm not advocating. I'm not recommending it as an approach. It was a necessity. Again, think about the fact that I was dedicating my life to build something that I talk to my potential customers and have no idea what I'm saying. That's not a good sign, let alone want to buy it. What we decided to do was basically, okay, let's just build the base system and let's put it out there. Let's just make it self-serve. So people who actually know, because I knew a lot of engineers and a lot of people who build great systems need this, right? I should just tell them that it exists as a service, and enough of them will figure it out, and we will start getting more signal from the market. Sure enough, that's what we did. The very first system, we called it V1, was a very, very good core engine that I built myself as a part of fundraising for this thing. But frankly, a pretty rickety distributed system. We had no billing and metering. We had no auto scaling. We had almost nothing. But the core performance was really, really good. And so a very, very early set of developers started picking this up. I remember in the early days, we literally would have a Slack channel alerting us on people who access the console. It's not even people who sign up or start paying us. Even accessing the console was hey, somebody's actually using this thing. This is amazing.
And who's, by the way, you say we, who's working on it at that point?
So now we at that point are a very small team. We're essentially one person who's a good friend of mine who basically picked up all of the non-engineering stuff. Basically, he called himself chief of everything else. We're a handful of engineers, 5-6 engineers.
And how are you paying them?
We had small, friends and family initial funding, but we had not had a seed fund yet. So it took us.
You raised what, $1 million or $2 million or so?
We raised a little bit of money to, exactly, a small amount of money to fund the team and run some stuff. Okay. We went to the people who use our system. Again, we're talking about very small numbers. I'm talking about maybe 10, 30, 20 teams who are using our service. And we just went to them and we asked them, what do you call this thing? We told you what the API is, but we never told you what this thing is called.
This thing is so technical, it doesn't even have a name.
No, we tried. It's not that we didn't try to name it. We tried a bunch of shit, but it didn't make sense. People didn't know anything. And then we literally asked them, hey, you internally in your team, you talk about using this Pinecone thing. What do you think it is? What do you call this internally? 7 out of 10 would say, we just call it a vector database. It's that's where we have our vectors, we have our embeddings. You guys are the database, and we just call it that. And he said, okay, then that's if that's what everybody thinks it is, and that's what it is.
I have to admit, this is a product, like I've done maybe like 100, 150 episodes. This is a PMF show first that, you you kind of like, I mean, you know what your thing is, but you don't really know what your product is. You got to go to your users to let them tell you.
And then, of course, we started calling it a vector database. We started explaining what it is.
And people are building like those first teams, like what are they building with what they think of as a vector database?
They're building search engines, they're building recommendation systems, they're building deduplication, anomaly detection, kind of search stuff. All the LLMs and RAG and agents have not been created yet. This doesn't exist yet. Interestingly enough, talk about a founder story. At some point, I figured we really don't know how to talk about this thing. We're doing an absolutely abysmal job at educating the market about what this thing is. One of the very first people I hired was a person called Greg Kogan, who came in as a VP of marketing. And his job was just explain to people what this thing even is. Like, go try to find a way to get people to even like know about our existence. We tried. I'm telling you, we tried everything. Explaining how to use it and what it's for and what the business value is and what the added, like, we got so much bad advice. It's insane. Every investor, every business leader, every marketing guru, everybody gave us the absolute worst advice, right? And I remember a very important meeting with Greg. We were just kind of sitting there with, just wrecking our brains about what do we do? Like, nobody gets any of this. And then we had the epiphany of like, wait a second. If you don't know what a vector database is, and when we tell you vector database and you don't know you can't already like kind of guess that this is the thing you're looking for because you have embeddings, you're doing search and you're doing vector search and you're trying to scale and it's painful and hard and so on. If you don't already experience that, you're not our customer.
That's right.
It doesn't matter. Like, it just doesn't matter. So I remember we just said, why don't we try to just scrape the website of anything that has to do with value? It's not what you're going to build. It's not why it's important for your business. It's not how it's going to propel your application forward. It's not about the time you'll save. It's not about your developers. It's nothing. It's an API. It's a vector database. Here's the API. Here's how much it's going to cost you. Here's the performance. If you like it, great. If you don't like it, go to hell. Amazing. Like, all the metrics, all the adoption, everything just completely was like a discontinuity. It went from essentially nothing to like something that looks like adoption.
What do you think was happening? Because I understand the point that, hey, if you're not an ICP right now, you don't matter. That makes sense to me. But for your ICPs, what was happening before? They were looking at your website and even they were confused and not pushing through? Or why do you think that led your ICPs to convert better?
Correct. Because when you're an engineer and you're looking for and you're looking for a vector database, you don't want to hear about, how much it's going to streamline your, whatever,
all the marketing bullshit,
relationship between engineers and data scientists. You're not connecting your, you don't care about it. You know all of that already. You're already trying to build a goddamn thing. You have a pretty good conviction that what you're doing is important. You just need the tool that solves the problem that you have, right? And so if we waste your energy or time or distract you with traditional marketing stuff, it's a waste of energy. And it alienates you and wastes your time and frankly confuses you. So you're like, oh, what is this thing then? It's a platform for this. It's a dev tool for, I don't know what this shit is, right? It's a database and you do vector search and you do that at scale. And this is how your workload is going to look like. That's exactly what I'm looking for.
You know what? This is like, so I'm obviously not a technical founder, but my kind of simple mind looks at this and thinks to myself, the kind of analogy that comes to my mind is you go to Home Depot, and I'm also not like a carpenter or tools person by any means, right? But there is so many different tools, like literally tools, like you mentioned an engineering tool, right? But like tools that somebody that wants to build stuff needs. And some of them are like a hammer and a screwdriver, super simple. But some of them are very, very specific, right? Like for if you need to cut wood in this specific way for this specific thing, like this is the thing that you need. That maker of that tool doesn't try to simplify or kind of explain to the rest of the world why somebody would need this thing? Because to your point, like the person who needs that thing knows exactly what they need and why. And when they see it, it's immediately obvious, and anything else would kind of be a waste of time and maybe add more confusion than anything else.
Yeah, it's a perfect analogy, and frankly, I am a hobbyist carpenter. I used to build a lot of our own furniture, and you're absolutely right. I frankly actually use this exact example with some of my marketing folks sometimes. Like, it's exactly that. When you go and look at a miter saw and you look at the specs and what it is and how it's promoted, if somebody wrote to you that, you know, building chairs is fun, you would you'd look like a fool. Like, you'd say, I'm never gonna buy this shit because, like, clearly not. What is this? Like, of course not, right? I just need to know whatever. If it has the features that I need, it fits in my workshop, does it, whatever. Like, can I afford it? Whatever, all that stuff, right? So yes, I mean, that was a pivotal moment on, wait a second, our buyers and our ICP and the people we speak with are not application builders or scientists or any of those things, or engineers. They're engineers who build big, hard, complex systems, and they need a professional grade tool.
And what year is it, by the way, when you make this change and start to see that traction?
So this is 2022, roughly. So 2.5 years in.
You love this show. You don't want to miss the next episode. Why would you? So hit that follow button. Trust me, it's in your own best interest.
What about on the fundraising front? Had you been able to communicate the story to VCs? Had you already raised like a big seed round or Series A or whatever? Where were you at?
Interestingly, again, this is our fundraising, our seed fundraising spanned, was sort of, this epiphany came in roughly towards the end of the fundraising, the seed fundraising round. And so I have, at that point, spoken with every VC in the Bay Area, have gotten a brutal rejection from each and every one of them. Like, I swear to God, like, there's not a third-rate VC in the Bay Area that I have not pitched to with like all my, with everything I got, and got completely, got the door slammed in my face. I remember very much at the end of this journey, and we had a pitch deck and this and that we worked on, and really fine-tuned the hell out of, and thought it was as good as it gonna get. And I remember towards the end of the journey, I was giving up. We had like 6 more months of runway. We had effectively failed to raise the seed round. We're like, okay, now what do you do? Like, do you just stop and try a Hail Mary again in 4 months when hopefully something changes? With 2 months left of runway, and like sort of have your back to the wall or whatnot. There was one more meeting where, I was going to cancel it, to be honest. I said, okay, fine. It's not going to work anyway. It's stupid. We have to try it, God knows, like 40 times now. It's stupid. Whatever we got doesn't work. So I remember the meeting is the next day. It's the first day of my son's first grade in COVID. So I have to manage that. My wife is working the COVID ward at Stanford. Like, I'm alone. I remember 10 p.m. the day before, I'm like, screw this deck that we worked on that we tried and failed 40 times. I'm going to just rewrite the whole thing in like a pretty freaking Google Docs. I'm just going to do the most, bare bones thing, but explain it in a completely different way. And I went on the call and said, hey, forget everything that I told you. We're just building a different kind of database. That's it. It's a different kind of database. This is what it does really well. This is what it doesn't do. I think it's big, and here's why. That completely changed the story. Suddenly this clicked. And so within literally a few weeks, we had secured our seed funding from Peter Wagner, who leads Wing, who had before that invested in Snowflake and others, who really knows databases, knows the data infrastructure space really well. And sort of figured there's something, there's a there.
That was the $10 million kind of seed?
Correct. So this completed the $10 million seed, which gave us enough time to go grow.
One thing I do have to ask is it's funny, this happens a lot when something finally clicks. Like, in a sense, when you tell me now, well, then we just went in and just said, we're building a different database, and it resonated. I'm like, well, what the hell were you doing the other 40 times, But it makes so much sense afterwards. But I am curious, before that, that deck that you destroyed, like what was that story?
We were trying to explain the value. So we looked at the applications that you build with vector databases today, which are still mostly, I mean, now that with LLMs, there's much more you can do. But back then, it's the kinds of applications you build with this thing. And we try to explain that you need this like specialized system to be able to build all these different applications, right? But then it's very confusing because it's not clear what you're building. Are you building like a platform of solutions that you can do recommender systems on, that you can do semantic search on? What is this thing? Is it like, it's not clear.
It's not simple enough and it's not pointed enough. And I'll say one thing, like VCs, I think, we're tech VCs, like we pride ourselves on understanding technology, but like the reality is, and I was speaking for myself and most, some are truly technical, but the vast majority have a surface level understanding of this stuff. Like if you start going deep and technical with these guys, they usually can't keep up. And so like in a sense, what you had to do was really boil it down and simplify it. And that's why sometimes, again, like analogies work. They really work when it comes to fundraising. So that's why like you get this like Uber for X kind of mania throughout the 2010s and then it gets overdone. But in your case, it was like, listen, our database is big. Yeah, database is big. We're building a new database, right? And like there's going to be a world that needs it. Here's why. It's like, okay, that kind of makes sense. You know what I mean? Like all of a sudden you're talking their language. So it makes sense to me that it would resonate.
Yeah, again, in hindsight, it all makes perfect sense. And I remember, by the way, even if after we made the first PR about our fundraise from Wing, and we said, hey, we're Pinecone, we're building a vector database, people called me like concerned. Like, hey, who cares about a new vector? Who cares about what's a vector? What do you want from us? Who needs a new database? Are you insane? Databases take a decade to build before they even was jack shit. Like, what are you doing? At that point, I had the very good fortune of having Tim Tully, who is a partner at Menlo, be a friend. And he used to be the CTO of Splunk. And before that, he used to be, we used to work together at Yahoo. We ran a lot of the data platforms at Yahoo. So we worked together with Ram, our CTO, who's still our CTO at Pinecone. So we all three of us worked together. Interestingly enough, he had tried to hire me into Splunk before that from AWS, and I decided to go start Pinecone. But a couple of years later, he had left Splunk and became an investor. He knew both me and Ram and knew the technology because we have built this inside Yahoo for God knows how many applications. So he knew exactly what we're doing. Like it was like clear as daylight. I didn't have to explain anything. I just said, hey, like, do you want to go do this? I said, hell yes.
Different conversation.
There's no way I'm not leading this round. I just, we just have to go do this. So I had the very good fortune of having somebody like Tim lead the A round.
Which was what, a year or so after your
That was
seed?
probably a year after.
Okay. And where was the business, like what had happened through that year? Like where was the business at? What was the business model even at this point?
We had always been exactly the same thing. We're a fully managed cloud service vector database with the understanding that it's hard to do, it's hard to manage, it's hard to get the efficiencies in. The only thing people could do at the time was really spin up all sorts of like open source libraries and kind of primordial versions of what a vector database would end up being, also containers and so on. But it was incredibly hard to manage. Like for you to use anything, you had to really become really well versed in algorithms and how to optimize whatever floating point representations of whatnot and choose exactly the hyperparameters of everything. It was a mess. Nobody wanted to do that. We said, we need to do this really well out of the gate. You bring your workload and everything should just work. Mind you, by the way, there were many other complications of simultaneous reads and writes and scaling and horizontal and vertical. It was clear that to do this in a way that was actually convenient and cost effective and scalable, you had to manage a service. Okay, there's no way.
Does that mean like you're charging by what? You're charging like per API call, or what's kind of the?
So back then we charged by something we called a pod, which is just a fraction, essentially like a small node, like a fraction of a node. So when Tim comes in, the business is essentially not really existent yet.
You're still building, like you're still kind of building the
We're
product.
still building. We have start having very little traction. We are, I forget what the revenue was, but it was tiny. It was,
100K, sub 100K.
yeah, something like that. So say 100K ballpark. I mean, it doesn't matter. I forget if it might have been,
Insignificant, yeah.
it might even be less than that, to be honest. I don't even remember exactly. But the usage started picking up. You could start seeing customers and people come in, adopt, start spinning up use. It started working, right? Again, the marketing, the product was stable enough, and the workloads were growing. So when we started on like a well-sized vector search use case was, I don't know, like 100,000 vectors was great. It was like a good-sized workload, right? 1 million, it was like a lot, If you try to do 10 million, that was like a flex. You're just trying to show off that you can do it. But you started seeing that grow as well. So it's clear, there was clear the market had demand for it. Clearly, we had not landed the leadership of it. We have not cemented our, whatever, dominance in the space. A lot of different things were really sort of very, very nascent. But again, I had the very, very good fortune of having the investor who knew me, who knew my CTO, and who knew the product so well that was enough for them. That was like, okay, fine, this is going to be the winner, and I'm going to be, I'm going to go help lead that.
And how big was the Series A?
Series A, we brought in 28 more.
Okay. And so he must have had, like, obviously, I think for him, obviously there's not enough traction for this to be like a traction-driven Series A. So this is a bet on you, the team, but also he must have had, like you said, a pretty good understanding of the solution and a serious thesis that, like, because this is still, we're talking like early 22, this is pre kind of the ChatGPT moment. There's still obviously a lot of stuff happening in GPT, but he must have had, like, not necessarily that was going to happen, but like at least a very big conviction on where AI was going and how important all this stuff was going to be.
100%. Interestingly, I mean, just in an amazing, timing of the market for us, we had built this service that was frankly too advanced and too good and scalable for what most people were trying to use it for. And then essentially ChatGPT happens, okay? Like the foundation models start kicking in, ChatGPT happens.
Inside of Pinecone, what was it like when ChatGPT, like end of 22, and you see that happen?
It's frankly insanity. So this is, again, we're talking about a very small team. What happens then is something, frankly, I think that very few founders or, very few founders actually experience, which is it's a scaling of our service in a way that is frankly unsustainable. We cannot even meet the demand of what people want of us. At some point, again, I don't know if you remember the early days, but of that, but pretty much anybody that knew how to write any level, like any Python, the dentist who did the computer science at whatever high school, whatever, remembers how to write Python, now wanted to build like a little agent, try to figure out how to build like RAG and so, all that stuff. And everybody was basically, we were the only game in town. And so everybody would just write in the docs, go get an API key from Pinecone and go spin up this. And now your Jupyter notebook or whatever your Python app is going to start working with a vector database. And we started getting thousands of signups a day. Like we would spin up more and more and more machines. We got to the point where we would saturate whole like regions in AWS and GCP. We just couldn't meet the demand. It was insane. We started spending insane amounts of money on the free tier.
Like ChatGPT's ended 22, but at first people are just like the mainstream people are just using the ChatGPT app and just like shocked with the power of it. But what's happening on the technical side? Is it right away that people are kind of like using the APIs and whatever and trying to build apps with it?
Immediately. It actually started picking up even before because, ChatGPT was only the chat interface, like
That's right.
GPTs and LLMs, and started being sort of already pretty good and much more, that improvement started happening even before ChatGPT. So you saw that pick up, but ChatGPT really put everything on the front stage and it became, the main conversation everywhere. right? And so not only was the capability there, and we were the only game in town, it became a top-down directive from every CEO and every board of directors to go build stuff, right? And like everybody was all the startups already was like the firing shot of like, hey, let's go build the next, what have you that's LLM based. RAG, which is a retrieval augmented generation, which is pretty much the only way to add your own data in your own context and bring the value of the data that you have and expose it and make it sort of useful, kind of bring the knowledge that you have into the model that it was pre-trained on, of course, not your data because you didn't train the model. That became the only true, fairly well understood, easy enough, good way to add knowledge to AI applications. And so that started taking off like insane. Like I told you, like literally thousands of signups and conversions to paid customers like a day. We're spinning up an infinite amount of hardware. Again, it was sort of insane. We didn't sleep for 3 months. Like we would wake up in the morning and revenue's up 5%. It was like, okay, what happened? We don't know. Like, let's go look at the logs.
How?
Like,
Give me a sense. Like we don't need to get into revenue today, though. Whatever you share is great. But like at that time, right? We were talking about by the time of the Series A, early 22, you're insignificant revenue, sub 100K. When do you hit $1 million? When do you hit 2? Like, are you doubling every month at that point? You know what I mean? Like, what is that curve like in those early days?
Yeah, we hit. So our series. So this kind of fits almost perfectly into the Series B, which was eventually led by Andreessen Horowitz. We finished that year with roughly 2 million in revenue and roughly 20.
The year of GBT or the year after?
Yeah, 22.
22 with 2 million, yeah.
We finished with roughly 2 million in revenue with a few hundred customers and an insane growth. Like all the graphs are just like not normal, like to the point that it's just not sustainable. It's clearly something insane is happening here. The interesting thing is, this is kind of funny also founding story. This is the Series B is the exact polar opposite of my seed funding. Like you cannot imagine a more polar opposite. It was just we are the hottest company in the Bay Area. Everybody of course knows who we are, what we do, and why it's important. And not a single person, I didn't have to pitch I didn't have to say anything. Like it was just, I was invited for VCs to pitch to me why I would be, I swear to God, like I remember it as like a cultural shock. VCs would send me their pitch deck on Pinecone about why it's a great investment, their entire research. They would send me like 50-page documents on all the market research and exactly how we're the leader and how we're going to win and what we're going to do and why they think we're the best company to invest in. It was just nuts. I'm telling you, it was just like not normal. The interesting thing is, we got a very high, good valuation in our B round, mainly for this reason, obviously. We didn't try to raise so much, but you know how these things go. Oh, exactly. It was like super, super, like ton of pressure to come in.
Oh, everybody's coming at you and the valuations make sense. Yeah.
I think some people felt like there's a handful of VCs that got priced out. Like, say, oh, fine, this price is too high, blah, blah, blah. We closed the round between when we signed the term sheet and when closing, we 5x'd the number of paid customers. And this is the year this is the year after. Yes, this is the beginning of 23.
And this is a year after. So you hit 2 million end of 22, 5x in like a month, and like a month or two. Like that's what long takes to close. Insane.
Of course, it's number of customers. Many of them are pretty small. Whatever. Like there's a very, it's a managed service. There's a very wide distribution of sizes of customers, but still people who, converted to paying customers and are paying you some amount of money. Usually very small numbers, obviously. Again, most use cases were for pretty small. A lot of people are learning and so on. The most interesting thing in that journey, and then this is 2023, we start seeing for the first time. So we start understanding two main things. Okay, people use us as a system of record and really rely on us as a fundamental building block in their stack. Okay. The second we have like a glitch or an outage or anything, like Twitter started exploding. It's like, holy shit, like Pinecone's having an outage. And like, holy shit, like
Makes
I
sense though, right? As a database that you would
it does, and but it sounds insane. Of course, now it's obvious we are a database with a foundational like infrastructure layer in like a very large application. We just frankly, we were naive enough to frankly not even understand how critical we were in their infrastructure. Like this was even like whatever degradation in whatever write throughput in a small region became like a big issue. I'm like, holy shit, okay, fine, we have to really up our game, A. And B, we started seeing probably a year and a half before the rest of the market what scaled workloads in production truly look like. Because we're a managed service, we track everything, all the SKUs and of data and the workload sizes and shapes and throughputs and acceptable latencies and all the contentions and between writes and reads and all that stuff. And we could also see the prices, the costs of running the system. And we start to figure out, wait a second, if we need to do this at if we need to do this at the 100x scale of where we are today, we're going to have to build something very, very, very different. Separates writes and reads, that has multi-tenancy sort of built in, that the storage is all blob. You cannot afford to use SSDs anymore because it becomes too expensive. There's so many core tenancy had to change in the system for it to be able to work at those sizes. And we embarked on building what is now Pinecone. The main product for Pinecone is a serverless product, fully managed serverless product. We basically redesigned the whole DB, the core indices, the core algorithms, of course, were reused and improved and so on. But we had to rebuild the entire system, which is a huge bet for a company, for a database to go rebuild what it is mid-flight and keep serving all these workloads was a massive strategic bet that we sunk in probably more than a year of the company to almost stop improving the old product just to build the future.
And that launched when?
That launched beginning of 2024. Amazingly enough, we could not only reduce our own operating costs significantly and roll on the prices with the price decrease for customers. So now we can offer the service to be 10x cheaper. So the cost, so people who used to pay us, $3,000-$4,000 a month started paying $200 a month, and it became a no-brainer. So everybody started scaling, right? Because now they could. Everybody for which price consideration was an issue or scale was an issue, started scaling a lot more. We now have more than a year of operating this new system. It's a heck of a lot better. It's a heck of a lot more, faster, cheaper, more performant, more stable, and so on. And we're still advancing on it significantly. In fact, we have a major version coming out very shortly that we're not talking about yet, but it will be yet another significant step forward on scale and production readiness of these systems at really extreme ends of the space. And so the sort of a lot of early bets really paid out in a massive way. The fact that we were a system, the fact that we could manage the workloads, the fact that we could see what people are trying to do with our system and hitting limits, and the fact that we could actually improve the software for them and have the applications just continue to run without a hitch. That was massive. There's very few other companies that I know about can do that. And so, to this day, we ship very significant improvements to our system and completely change the serving layer, and applications that do literally hundreds or sometimes, even more queries per second, just continue as if nothing happened and, run in production, even though we changed the engine mid-flight.
Let me stop it there. And, normally we finish with two questions. And the first one's usually like, when did you feel like you had product market fit? I feel like you kind of answered that. Like certainly, that GPT and certainly the ChatGPT moment, I think were big ones. Let me ask a different question, which is, you build vector databases when it was kind of so early, you didn't even know, what to call them. And everybody thought that what you did made no sense. And then you were right there when the world effectively changed from the outside looking in, looking like 0 to 1, but obviously there was an undercurrent. But my question is like, what does it feel like to be right. Like to be right in a way where everybody else, had no idea and you just were so right. Like what's that feel like as a founder?
I mean, obviously, it's very validating. I wish I could tell you I had like a round of victory telling everybody that I told them so. It didn't happen yet. Yeah, you're so busy executing and building and serving customers and solving problems that I don't think about that.
I'm going to build an app. It's going to be called the Told You So app. And every time a VC rejects you, you just add their email there. And then one day you click a button and they all get told.
I'll tell you one funny anecdote about this. I remember meeting an investor in the B round where we were the hottest shit in town that had rejected me in my seed. In the meeting, he said, "Hey, I looked up my notes and I now understand that what you were pitching that you were going to do, you actually did. You actually did the thing you said you were going to do." And I said, yeah. I mean, isn't that how it usually works? It's like, no.
That's awesome, man.
So yeah, you had moments like that, but frankly, I think that the more exciting, not the more, but thing that is just as exciting to me now, maybe as a scientist, maybe as somebody who sort of like a big part of my, cycles are dedicated to what does the world and technology look like in 3 to 5 to 10 years. We have just as much conviction about where we're going as the amount of conviction that we had 5 years ago. If you look at agents and what they're trying to do now, how conversations, we have people building conversational agents on top of Pinecone, efficiencies inside big companies, support, personal assistance, you name it. The vision of making knowledge and information, regardless of where it comes from, whether it's a text file or an image or a Jira ticket or a legal contract or whatever, sales call, making that organized and summarized and indexed and ready to be actionable in real time as insights to those agents and to those systems and those search platforms and so on. That is still happening. And that is still hard. And a vector database is a big part of that. It's probably the biggest part of making that production ready at scale. But there's so much more. And we see that the arc of the company and the journey that we're on really has just begun, to be honest. I mean, we in the sense that in the same way that BERT was a sort of like a spark and like we know something is happening here. We can do stuff we couldn't do before, but it's still raw. This is where we are today with respect to knowledge. We now understand RAG. People do RAG with Pinecone all the time, right? It became a very well understood pattern. People know, synonymize us with that. People start powering agents with us and so on. It's doing qualitatively better than anything else you can do, but it's still hard. It's still clunky. It's still complicated. People still need to figure it out. We are now with knowledge where we were with models 5 years ago. If you talk to a big company building applications in-house, or you talk to a startup or a company that has a lot of data that specializes in, say, support or some, what have you, conversations and agents and whatnot, we are still very far from them taking it for granted that all the data that they have, all the information they've gathered, they can easily put into Pinecone, and that is obviously perfectly accessible and understood and organized and surfaced at the right moment to the right application, and that is obviously works perfectly. That's the journey we're on. Okay, you are going to I'm telling you, in 5 years, the thought that maybe the conversational agent that you are talking to inside your company hasn't listened to all the sales calls that ever happened in the company, knows everything about your product and can talk about it intelligently. The thought that that's not the case is going to be weird to you, right? Obviously, it knows everything. We'll get there, but there are at least 5 years worth of innovation and building in front of us to do that in production at scale with accuracy, with all the bells and whistles and all the models and all the hooks and everything, for everything to work perfectly. So I have no doubt that this is happening. And I have as much confidence that this is going to be the future in 5 years, in the same way that, I had confidence we'd be here with Pinecone 5 years ago.
And then the last question is, what would be like your number one piece or a top piece of advice that you would give an early stage founder today?
That's so hard. I mean, so I work with a lot of, I really work with a lot of early stage founders because I love it. I think, it's such a hard job, and it's such a ill-defined, journey you're embarking on, that every person needs a, slightly different kind of coaching and support. And I had the very good fortune of being surrounded with somebody like Bob Muglia, who eventually joined my board. And he's one of those people who always can zoom out and tell you, okay, where things are going and why you should be worried about and why you shouldn't, and so on. I think the one thing that founders tend to misjudge is how much control they have over anything in both directions. Sometimes you feel like you're constrained by your team or by your customer or by this or by that, and you feel super, stressed and boxed in about a bunch of stuff, where somebody needs to come to you and say, yeah, it's your company. You can just decide how things work and tell people what it is, and just, if they don't like it, they can go to hell. At the same time, you also overestimate your ability to influence the market and what the timing. One of the things that we have had amazing good fortune with is ChatGPT and AI shooting up to the sky. That's a market thing. We didn't do that. We had the very good fortune of being in the right place in the right time. Well, we didn't build OpenAI. OpenAI happened on its own. And frankly, we are now going through another phase like that, where models are changing and all the dynamics and whatever, like all of, everything that's happening in the maturing of the market. That takes time. That's going to take 3-4 years. Doesn't matter how good your product is. It just doesn't matter. You just have to wait. You just have to be there, right? I think the main advice is really try to be very open-eyed about what you control and what you don't control, and sort of kind of go with it. It's, sometimes even very critical things for your business are outside of your control, and you just have to just stick it out and hope for the best. And sometimes, you have to go and change big things, even though it's scary.
Well, Edo, thanks so much for jumping on the show, man. It's been awesome.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
85% of people who listen to the show just started listening to it this year. You're probably one of those people. In fact, the odds are 85%. Guess what? You need to go back, because there are over 100 other episodes that you need to check out that are just as good, if not better, than this one. Don't miss out.